4.4 notes example 7, letter A. We're going to write an equation that corresponds to the graph. Now, when I am given a sinusoidal function, the first thing I'm going to do is identify a portion of the curve, and I typically begin where the x-axis and the y-axis join together, so near the origin. Now, if I look at letter A, I see that when x is 0, y is 0.5, so we're at a maximum, and what I'm going to do is find one period of this curve. Okay, that's kind of hard to see, so I'm going to highlight it in a different color. Okay, so I go from a maximum, and one period will take me to the next maximum. That is one period of this curve, and because it begins at a maximum, this represents a cosine curve. Now, in order to write the equation, we need to find the values of A, B, C, and D. But in order to do that, we need to identify the amplitude, the period, the phase shift, and the vertical shift. Now, the amplitude is the distance from the x-axis to a maximum or from the x-axis to a minimum. Okay, so here is my x-axis where y is 0. And if I go up to my maximum, it's 0.5. So that means my amplitude is 0.5 or 1/2. Since the curve begins at a maximum, there's no reflection. So my A value is also going to be 0.5, or we typically see it as fractions, 1/2. Now, my period is the length of one cycle, so from a maximum to a maximum. So here I'm at the x value of 0, and it ends at the x value 6 pi. So this is my period. The difference between 6 pi and 0 is 6 pi. Now, I have to use my period to find the value of b. Okay? Now, if you recall, a period is equal to 2 pi divided by b. Well, I found that the period is equal to 6 pi. So I have an equation, 6 pi is equal to 2 pi over b. The opposite of dividing by b would be to multiply both sides of the equation by b. So b times 6 pi is 6 pi b is equal to 2 pi. And to solve for b, I divide both sides by 6 pi. And if I reduce, 2/6 reduces to 1/3. Pi divided by pi is 1, so I can cross those out. So my b value is 1/3. Okay. Since my curve begins where x is 0, there is no phase shift, which means my c value is 0. And because my maximum is at 0.5 and my minimum is at -0.5, that means my midline falls on the x-axis, which means I have no vertical shift, and my d value is also 0. So to write my equation, I plug in my a value and b value into the general form of this function. So we would have y equals a is 1/2 times cosine. My b value is 1/3. So 1/3 times x is x divided by 3. There is no c value and there is no d value. So I can close my parentheses and I have the equation that represents this curve. Okay. Now let's take a look at letter B. Okay, this is where the first problem. Okay, in my second problem, I need to highlight a portion of the curve. Now I see near the origin, okay, I have a curve that looks like this, okay? And this to me looks like a cosine curve. Now notice the distance between the y values, the maximum is at 2, and my minimum is at -6. Okay, let's see. The distance between 2 and -6 is 8 units. Divide that in half, and my midline is going to fall 4 units between 2 and -6. So 2 minus 4 would put my midline right at y equals -2. Okay, which means I have a vertical shift, and this graph has been shifted down 2 units. Now notice my first point of this curve falls on that midline, which is representative of a sine curve. So I'm going to use y equals a sine bx minus c plus d. Okay. The amplitude is the distance between the midline and a maximum, or the midline and a minimum. So the distance between 2 and -2 is 4. Okay, so my amplitude is 4. Because the curve goes up to a maximum first, there is no reflection. A is positive, so A is also equal to 4. Now, the period is the length of one curve. So x value begins at 0, one period ends at 4 pi. Okay, the distance between 0 and 4 pi is 4 pi, so my period is 4 pi. So to find the b value, okay, I take my period, 4 pi, and set it equal to 2 pi over b, which is the formula to find the period. The opposite of dividing by b is to multiply both sides by b. So we have 4 pi times b is equal to 2 pi. Divide both sides by 4 pi. Okay, and I have b is equal to 1/2. Okay. There is no phase shift because my first point occurs where x is 0. Since there is no phase shift, c is 0. Okay, my vertical shift went down 2 units, so d is -2. As soon as I have values for a, b, c, and d, I can plug those into the formula for my sine curve. So I have y equals, my a value is 4, and I have sine. My b value is 1/2, so 1/2 times x is x divided by 2. Okay, there is no c value. If I put in 0, I'd have to simplify. Then I have plus d. Now my d value is -2, so either in front of the 4 or behind the parentheses, I would apply my d value of -2. And we have an equation that represents this curve.